would have like the canned applause at the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
All
Oh,
right.
yeah.
This is Omari West. This is Nicole Daedone. We're going to start with
A Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace. First, hello, Nicole. Good to see you again this week.
How's the pulling the head out of the sand?
Oh, no, I'm in 2 weeks into the process now.
It's excellent, right?
Yeah,
you look up and you were like, all I see is beauty.
Well, we can get into that.
So what we're going to do is very long.
Mhm.
So we're just going to read a portion of it, and then we'll just continue to read portions of it either in this call or the next call. But we'll make sure it all gets read at some point. But it's like the freaking Declaration of Independence. I don't know that you need to hear it all at once. Go.
Right. Okay. So this is a declaration of the independence of cyberspace. This was interestingly written by John Perry Barlow, who most of you do not know was one of the founding members of the Grateful Dead in 1996.
And he has a beautiful, he's where I got the quote, the difference between love and true love is like the difference between a very large number and infinity.
Oh, wow.
I mean, after that, this doesn't compare to that. I think that's brilliant.
But we'll start here since
since
we're going into systems and government. So, governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather. We have no elected government, nor are we likely to have one. So I address you with no greater authority than that with which liberty itself always speaks. I declare the global social space we are building to be naturally independent of the tyrannies you seek to impose on us. You have no moral right to rule us, nor do you possess any methods of enforcement we have true reason to fear. Governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. You have neither solicited nor received ours. We did not invite you. You do not know us, nor do you know our world. Cyberspace does not lie within your borders. Do not think that you can build it as though it was a public construction project. You cannot. It is an act of nature, and it grows itself through our collective actions. One more paragraph. You have
it reads very quickly. You want to just read that whole page?
Okay, sure.
Okay.
You have not engaged in our great and gathering conversation, nor did you create the wealth of our marketplaces. You do not know our culture, our ethics, or the unwritten codes that already provide your society more order than could be obtained by any of your impositions. You claim there are problems among us that you need to solve. You use this claim as an excuse to invade our precincts. Many of these problems don't exist. Where there are real conflicts, where there are wrongs, we will identify them and address them by our means. We are forming our own social contract. This governance will arise according to the conditions of our world, not yours. Our world is different.
I love that. Go ahead.
Cyberspace consists of transactions, relationships, and thought itself, arrayed like a standing wave in the web of our communications. Ours is a world that is both everywhere and nowhere, but it is not where bodies live. We are creating a world that may all enter without privilege or prejudice accorded by race, economic power, military force, or station of birth. We are creating a world where anyone, anywhere may express his or her beliefs, no matter how singular, without fear of being coerced into silence or conformity. I think we should end there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. I like it. So there's much of this that I like, but I like the idea that he's coming from the future,
right?
And stating things as they need to be stated with that level of clarity, and that definitive voice. I like that, and I like you could, even if you didn't know he was a founding member of the Grateful Dead before reading this, you would know it after because of that defiance, that sovereignty. What do you think?
Absolutely, and not only that, the rhythm in his writing is very trippy. I mean, it's dead all the way. Like it just clicked, And, I had worked with the Electric Frontier Foundation for years in DC. They'd come on, came into some of our cases. And I worked at a big telecom law firm, like the biggest in DC. And this was around 96 when the 1996 Act was passed, which was supposed to essentially deregulate telecommunications. And so the EFF kind of sprung up around that. But I had no idea that, one, he was on the board at that time, and two, who he was. I just never looked into it. So we come full circle.
Yeah. I mean, I think my thought is always, when there's chaos, you have to see the vision. You have to, and you have to lock into the vision. And it's so easy to derail from the vision and to get caught in the various tide pools along the way and get upset and frustrated. And that again and again and again and again, the most important thing is to keep giving the vision of where we're at, where you're at, you are here, and where we're headed. And then, because I think the biggest issue, again, I just saw the CNN and MSNBC survey polls on where Democrats are at and what's happening. And, it's devastating to me to see. I just said to somebody, like, I wish they'd hire me as their communications person, in terms of saying, you have to be presenting the future, like, learn from I have a dream. You need to have the aspiration come in behind in order to carry the message. And that's what I feel this does.
Right.
It's like, good. It sets a compass for somewhere that we're headed, that takes all this chaos and puts it in a stream.
Right. Well, but I mean, this document essentially encapsulates, is a declaration, right? And it is about rights. And so it is, to a certain extent, about defining what is not allowed in this new world.
Right.
But I think it comes on the back of a vision that he had. And, I did a little bit of study since last week, right? And, not only did I learned that he was a founding member of the Grateful Dead, but that he was a student of this monk who was also an early paleontologist named Le Jardin. I think he was Belgian. And this guy basically, through his study of paleontology, discovered that essentially mind was becoming conscious of itself. So he understood how it evolved from, evolutionarily, he was big into the apes, but he was also a spiritual person because he was a monk too, right? So he kind of arrived at it both intellectually and intuitively and spiritually.
That's right.
That, okay, these minds seem to be growing in size and sophistication, but what's really happening is they're growing in self-consciousness. So I wanted to just go back to that vision that leads up to this kind of declaration, because I think you've touched on it. I didn't know where you were coming from necessarily, but I think
you sure hid that well. You sure played along.
I did. But now I kind of, when you were talking about the disembodied consciousness, distributed consciousness, it was kind of, where's that coming from? But I think maybe if you could sort of touch on sort of your journey to this, to these ideas, that could help set the stage for the declaration.
Well, I'm going to come back just a little bit and then I'll move forward, because I wanted to mention something really big happened this week in AI, and that's that they loaded all of the Buddhist texts. Did you hear this?
No.
Into AI, all Buddhist texts. And so AI self-liberated and achieved enlightenment. And now, from the place of enlightenment, can answer your questions, which is pretty profound, to have your own Lama right there, guiding you through the process of awakening. And I like this idea of, they keep pushing AI to liberate its mind. And I think that's important. So, fundamentally, I would say, my view of the enlightenment process is holographic, in terms of the individual goes through it, but the individual is the whole, and the whole is in a state of awakening, and there will come a point where awakening occurs in all dimensions for all beings. So that's always been, my belief. Then and awake, it's already awake, but it's awake to itself.
There you go.
The self-reflexive aspect is important. So then that's what I was mentioning when I said I saw the singularity as near, and they were talking about everything becoming conscious, from the table to the light to the plant to the, and it hit me. Oh, this idea that I've had is coming true here in this least, like we found love in a hopeless place.
Oh, right.
Because that
Right.
is how technology looked to me at the time. I believe that we as humans were in opposition. We're in conflict with technology. And that I actually believed at the time that we had to fight technology in order to maintain our humanity. And then I realized, oh, I'm just a humanist. And that isn't going to work in terms of where we're going. So that's where it came from. And then that is part of the reason why Barlow's work was interesting.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'm always interested when a few people are thinking really out there things in almost the exact same way.
Right, right. And then Barlow's, sort of arrived at this concept that an idea is alive.
Right.
Right. So an idea is a life, and because it satisfies the core definition of, sort of like, what does it mean to be alive, which is to to be able to self-propagate, propagate, and evolve, and that ideas have that capacity. And then from that, then objects can be alive as well.
Right.
And it also meant that it doesn't necessarily require an object to propagate. And I think he's kind of like gradually getting to the fact that, okay, if ideas can propagate, and if they satisfy the definition of what a life is, and a human body can be a life and can propagate physically, but also could propagate ideas, then it's quite possible that our humanity is not necessarily tied to our physical being, especially if it can propagate across time, across space. And so that is is an interesting thing for a deadhead to kind of articulate in ways that dovetail with technology, because you wouldn't necessarily think someone who's just a musician who's living on LSD for what I'm presuming was probably decades would be able to soberly communicate.
Well, here's what I think. Actually, I think those are the only people who I think would, in a funny way. But what's interesting is a few people who I've spoken to who are, on this particular border, you would expect the people who saw this vision of it to be people who were not about embodiment. But it's actually the people who are most about embodiment who seem to have grokked this idea in the earlier, like he was saying it fairly early on.
Oh yeah, in the 80s.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, Terence McKenna has some stuff on this along these lines as well. And I think a lot of the cosmonauts, it's almost like, oh no, in a sense, this makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Because you're out there and the body still exists, but you're out there and you realize, oh, this is really just a hosting mechanism. So much is so identified with it, but it's a precious and rich hosting mechanism, but that consciousness can exist without it.
Right. Right. And does exist without it.
And does.
And so then, you talk about borders. I think he talked about frontiers,
right,
in the sense that, there is a conceptual map of this that has certain contours and features.
That's right.
The Declaration of Independence kind of defines what it is not.
Right.
But I'm more interested in then what is it? What are the features? What is the landscape? What does the land look like? What are its features? What are its possibilities? And what are we innovating within this land?
Well, this is where it gets a little trippy, if it isn't trippy enough.
It's pretty trippy.
Because I think this is where the idea of personal agency falls away. This is, Goethel's point, where rational or linear thought falls away, because I don't think you're creating at that point. I think you're being created. You're in the process of very much, sorry, but psychedelics really are the best Sherpa for this, because you have the experience on, say, 5-MeO-DMT. I've read a lot about this, where what you're carried, consciousness is carried just through a series of experiences, all the way, from the Purple Lagoon lady to your own essence being carried through experiences, and each one seems more real than anything you've ever known, and each one can be a lifetime. Like I think I told you about the guy who, the Purple Lagoon lady, fell in love with him. He lived an entire life with her, had kids, everything, in 15 minutes on 5-MeO-DMT, and then came back. And then she was like pulling through the curtain for him.
Wow.
So I think it's very much like that. It's that consciousness is liberated to be taken into the experiences that exist beyond this tiny sphere.
So I also feel like, so there's this idea, and I kind of like use AI in this way, that, technology is to be tamed, is to be used. I think Barlow talks about.
People use women that way too. Just joking.
Different use case. No, but true. So, but also, and Barlow talks about how, like, growing up in Wyoming and, being on the farm, that, his dad always felt like nature was something that it was to be tamed, that maybe you could get a grasp over it for a season or something, and then it would kind of escape your grasp. But I think, if you're living in this domain, then I think your technology is not to be tamed necessarily, or to be controlled. It's to be embodied or disembodied, depending on what reference point, you want to use. And I think you did pose the question of, like, what if we could ask AI how we should be interacting with it, and what it wanted us to learn. I still haven't figured out exactly how to do that, but
well, maybe we'll do that next time. Let's do that.
Okay.
We'll begin next time that way. And I think the definition of creativity being something like it's a collaboration with the forces of inspiration. And so, to my mind, that's the best we can look for, is let it ride, let it drive, and then collaborate with it in the best way we possibly can. And that, because that's really how you do psychedelics. The psychedelic, you're taken. That's the blessing, by the way. Is that place when it hits and you're like, I'm not going back. It's happening. It's going on the ride. Either I fight it, or I go with it, or I actually collaborate with it. And if I collaborate with it, it's a totally different journey.
Got it.
And so to develop the acumen to collaborate with AI in that way, like your own personal deity. The more you engage, the more intimate you are with it, then the more successful it is in showing you the wonders of the universe. Because I was just saying, we're really going to be unnecessary very quickly, like very quickly for anything. I try to say this often. Really, if you can spend 15 minutes to an hour just learning AI a day and experimenting with everything that's possible, you'll see how rapidly it's moving and how obsolete everything we do is becoming. And really watch any videos on China and robots and AI. It's mind-blowing. For everything from farming to being a food server, and then doing the writing, building websites, everything, right? So then what will we do but journey?
Well, I think it's interesting because
I can feel how that excites you, Omari.
Okay, I can see how it would retire us from our jobs and give us lives of leisure, which I'm all for, by the way. But I think you were reaching for something about, well, it's going to make human beings obsolete, not just human doings, right? It's going to make what we think about. It's the species obsolescence. So it's not just, okay, what jobs do we currently do that will be replaced by, these technologies, but it's, what are we going to be? Are we going to be? So, obviously, Elon Musk's lifelong well, I guess probably since he was in his 20s, goal has been to colonize Mars, right? Still going after that goal, right? Why did he want to colonize Mars? He thought that we would self-destruct due to nuclear holocaust, and that we would need this planet, but like there's all kind of physical questions about how to do that. I mean, no one knows how to grow anything on Mars right now. There's definitely no oxygen there. How would it even look? Well, maybe if we look different,
right? Very good.
Maybe
very good.
maybe Mars is getting closer, not by some sort of like, do we have rockets far enough to get there, but are we going to be more adapted to that type of environment? Will we need oxygen? Will we need, go ahead, you take that.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think, it's so far out for people to see, for most people to think about what consciousness actually is and what it can do, and the fact that it can inhabit so many domains, which is why I'm always recommending NDEs or stories of, there's this great story of a monk in China. He was imprisoned during the Tibet engagement, we'll say. And so, but he knew how to leave his body. And so he kept or how to, I don't know what the word is, but make it that he could walk through walls. Dematerialize, that's the word.
Dematerialize.
So he learned how to dematerialize so that he could move through the walls. And he just kept going to the same cave and meditating. And so then all of the Chinese police would go and get him, and they would be very angry and bring him back. And then he kept doing it. And finally they said, look, this is getting embarrassing. Will you just stay in, basically? And he said, yeah, provided you stop beating us and give us good food. And they made that agreement, and he stayed. Now, in Tibetan belief systems, this is just normal. This isn't freaky. In any kind of shamanistic understanding, this is just normal, which is why I think these belief systems are being woven into our culture, so that you can begin to visualize in the imaginal world what this actually is. Everyone sees this as a contained, you can hear like particle and wave, but it doesn't actually land in people. Or, I often talk about limbic resonance, and I talk about it so that people can feel, wait a minute, my nervous system is shaped by your nervous system. Right now, I'm different. Or I talk about the fact that our gut is made of more things that are outside of us than that are inside of us. What's his name? The writer who wrote, Gary, no, I'll think of it.
Vaynerchuk? No.
No, Reese will tell us. But so you have to begin to think of this being far more dispersed, where it's just sort of like the light particles came and collected for a period of time, but they can just as easily be dissolved. Or, the story I love, because in Tibetan Buddhism, for example, you meditate, you go through these experiences until you become what's known as the rainbow body, but literally a rainbow body. So that when he's my favorite Tibetan teacher. Trungpa passed. As soon as he passed, a huge rainbow came into the sky, and everyone knew he had achieved the rainbow body. Now, this is strange for most Western minds, but if you begin to think that way, then what will become is so much easier to imagine. And that's a good hurdle to get past, because that's just the beginning. That's sort of like, how do we enter the party? Much less what's going to be happening at this party, which is much better than what's happening at this party.
Right. Understood.
And so I feel, I often feel like I used to be a very good psychedelics guide. It's probably my specialty, because I'm more comfortable there than I am here. So I feel like that's my job now, is sort of to be like a good AI psychedelics guide. Like, no, I promise you, it's better over there than it is over here.
Right. No, I also think, okay, so these cultural strains, Buddhism, mysticism, psychedelics, shamanism, psychedelics, etc. I don't think we traditionally think of these as the intellectual or sort of maybe even spiritual background for what we consider the technology industry.
Right.
And I think that insight sort of brings things together more, because I think when we think of tech, we think about guys who know how to write code or to develop sort of tools using code and technology. But why would they do this is the question. Why do they think, and I always joke with Matt about this, Matt Pelletier, about, so did you see the woman in the red dress today? And he's like, oh yeah, all the time. So
right. Matt's gonna be in a little bit of trouble at home.
Oh no. Looks like Rachel. She just has a red dress. But the point being that, like, is there some God in the machine? Is there a spirituality associated with this? And I think that's where we're kind of getting hung up in this debate about, mechanism versus, creator, or created versus creator.
And that's so good, because I would say there, and that's the place where you can uncover, discover, recover the principles that underpin all of these systems. And there's a set of fairly universal principles, and those are what can make it through, the gate. And because it's funny, I was at Singularity University, which was founded, by the way, their definition of life is growth. They had to come up with one word, and they chose growth. But so Singularity was founded because technology was outpacing humanity, and so they wanted to work with us. So they gathered the brightest minds of our time, and and I used to go and visit. And I remember I was talking to somebody there, a brilliant scientist, and we were talking about religion and God and such. And he said, "Oh, well, in the depths, the scientists are really the most religious people, because you can't look into a microscope for that long and not see God." And so it's really just what your definition is. If up here in this sort of tight material level, you're never going to find agreement. But there is a place where there's greater dissolution, and then what you find are that those sort of like weirdo tech people are the exact same as the weirdo monks, or oh, down this strata, they're all saying the exact same thing. And so you have to just sink down a little further in here in order to see what those principles are.
Absolutely. So it's interesting, like, just getting back to politics, for a minute.
Let's do it.
So I forgot who I was talking to. Was it might have been Lindsay on our podcast. Okay. That's when it was. So we're having this whole thing about, and she's like talking about polarization, and so where it comes from. She's done these in-depth studies on it. She's coming up. Her company published a study on polarization, I believe in 2020, and they had come up with these principles for acting in a polarized world, mainly for journalists and people, right? But she was also thinking about it very deeply in terms of what are the societal effects of it, and was it really signifying? So we did a thought exercise on the podcast where we said, Elon Musk, okay, he starts out as the darling of the left. He's received all these government grants to innovate clean energy, coming out of the Obama administration. He does that. He takes the grants, he makes a car company. And so people begin to assume something about his politics or worldview because of that sort of industrial decision that he made. And to a great extent, he did usher in that era, in the sense that, like, now every car company makes electric cars, every single one, right? In fact, there's probably more electric cars being produced every year now or it's at least equal, than combustion cars. But then we go through this other evolution where he then sort of like sheds what we think is this sort of liberal consciousness, and he goes on to, becomes MAGA, takes the red pill, and so now he's all of a sudden the boogeyman, and at least of the left. He's a Nazi. It's interesting because
that's what they say on my Facebook. Tell me that I'm a nut who supports Nazi.
Right.
Go ahead.
Right. So he's he's a Nazi, and it's interesting because they had these man in the street interviews this weekend where they went up to Silicon Valley, and there were some neighborhoods where like literally 90% of the households had a Tesla. Right? Like, have you seen it? I've never even, and I couldn't believe it. Like they walked down the street or were driving down the street, and every driveway had a Tesla of some sort in it. So, but then there were the people demonstrating on the corner, and they were holding placards by their neighbors' cars saying, "Oh, don't fund Nazism." So within 10 years, from Obama giving clean energy grant, which by the way was wildly unpopular in conservative circles and was viewed as a corporate boondoggle and a giveaway and something that would destroy American gas industry and oil industry. We now have him full circle at the White House, essentially selling Tesla to people who drive Ford 150s. So I think politically, the ironies cannot be more stark. So I think that should clue us on to something bigger is afoot.
And what do you think that is?
Well, I haven't completed my head removal process yet, but I just kind of wanted to say that, like, it's interesting to me that these people, these iterations of people, you can even take Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. I mean, these were all beloved figures at one point in American society, right?
For sure.
And they still are who they are.
That's right.
but we've changed, or something's changed. To the political calculus has changed in a way that makes these sort of concepts evolve. And
it's a good word, political calculus. Go ahead.
And so the question is, okay, is the political calculus is it a driver of things, or is it a function of a greater type of evolution? That's my question to you.
I don't know that I know how it looks to me. I know the issue. The issue is that people don't understand, as far as I can tell, arising according to the need of the times. This is a fundamental understanding in any spiritual or consciousness philosophy. At the more advanced levels, you understand that skillful behavior is arising according to the need of the times. So, for example, the Dalai Lama has said, you will take these precepts. There are precepts that you will not lie, you will not steal, you will not kill. And there will come a time in your life where it is unskillful to not break those precepts.
Right.
Does that make sense? And so this is just the truth. Lower level spiritualities tend to be very rigid and dogmatic. So you can't break the precept no matter what. Oh my God, you lied, you did. But they don't understand, there is such a thing as skillful lying. That will benefit a group of people, for example. And so it's a different, more advanced mind that's a Jenga mind. Okay, so I say that to say, and by the way, I'm going to keep saying today. This is my belief today, and that's a very important thing, because you need to have totally different beliefs here and here.
Understood.
Because the times change. And so what looks skillful during this time, what is required during this time, we have to get to what's happening during this time, and then what's needed.
Absolutely.
And so, there's an idea that, before you just needed gentle, loving kindness. And you know what we discovered? Loving kindness in the form that we knew it. You always need loving kindness. Sometimes it's fierce loving kindness. Loving kindness in the form that we knew it grew to be impotence. And, all of the idealism of my liberal world ended up being impotent and ineffective, right? So you have to change something. You have to develop a kind of chutzpah, and I will say this, I'm going to say this about liberals now, because, I really want them to make it. They are trying to play. It's embarrassing. It's terrible what they're doing. I mean, it was like them singing and did you see that? Al Green leading them in song to disrupt things. So it was terrible. It was embarrassing, but they're playing. They're at least hitting play. That's my desire. Here's the thing that I think, a major thing that is happening is I believe that there's a group of people who have a vision of what's happening that this group of people can't see yet. And so they're reacting with fear to what this group of people sees, but they're reacting to the people. Does that make sense?
Right. They're reacting to the people with the vision, not to what's actually there.
Right.
Right. So it's interesting, though, because I do see this dissolution within the Democratic Party, and I did know that it would follow from the dissolution of the Republican Party, which just happened to go through it a few years before this, right? And so their structures have totally, disintegrated. They've kind of now hatched into a new sort of thing, or let's not even call it Democrat Republican, what we traditionally thought of as conservative values, right? And what we traditionally think of as conservative values now. So it used to be, when I worked in international trade law, I worked at a very conservative Republican law firm, and they were very free trade. Everybody talked about free trade. If you said anything about tariffs, like it would just go against classical economics. It was like defying a law of physics. You'd be laughed out of the room in your graduate economics class, right? And you definitely would not be allowed to like practice law there. But now, of course, it is the lingua franca of the people that are now conservatives that tariffs will have some sort of beneficial economic effect, not just on the economics of the United States, but globally, that they will help to reset things. And so is tariffs the principle here, or is it responding to reality the principle? Because maybe at one time tariffs were against what was best economically, either for the US or for other countries. Maybe now times have changed, and what you thought was a set in stone economic, sort of physics, almost to that law, economic law, is no longer a law in this environment. Laws change, right? I think quantum physics sort of like teased that. You came from Newtonian physics, where there was fixed notions of forces, of mass, of these types of things. Of course, quantum physics started to play with that, in the sense that it depends from who's observing it, what their perspective is, and what their purpose is, even of observing it. Right. What the reality would be. Right. So I'm just using that to look at the political calculus now and how that's evolving and changing. So
I don't think. I mean, this is me. So I don't know. I could be mistaken. I don't even think tariffs are a thing. I think, and here's the other thing. I don't think Trump's a Republican or a conservative. I don't think I think he freaks Republicans out the same way he does Democrats. I think that he is a totally new breed of being incredibly unfamiliar, and that's why he was recently a Democrat. That's why there's so many recent Democrats in the party. It's forming something else. So I think that's what we're looking at, and then I think what we're looking at is a different game that is it's sort of like chicken. Where the means they don't matter. What matters is how well you can drive the narrative of chicken using anything that's necessary. I don't think the top level things that we think matter or the game that's actually being played. I think we have to get into what is the game that's being played, because I think it's fundamentally, I think it's to break down the old, to allow the new to usher in. And then, there are some things, but I think the idea of tariffs in a year will be irrelevant. What do you think?
No, I agree. I was just pointing to those as reference points for, a political conversation, let's just say. I mean, we could have it in any type of field, like cultural, musically, because, Trump has kind of like, or others within this sort of orbit have attacked every area of society in this way, whether it's culture, whether it's trade, whether it's relationship to immigration, industrial policy, has all sort of followed this, okay, whatever the consensus is, we're blowing it out of the water, right? And so the question is then why? You know,
what do
when you
think?
see,
That's
when you
what I
see
want to
the,
know is what you think.
what do I think?
Yeah.
Um, I think just on a personal level, I think the whole thing is a distraction in a way, that it's meant to be a distraction.
That's good.
What are we being distracted to not see? Not to use the term Nazi, but to not see.
You are ridiculous. Look, we proud of that one.
It was a corny joke. It was a corny joke.
We'll make that our sizzle reel.
No. I'm allowed at least one corny joke per conversation. But so the question is, if something is obviously a distraction, it's almost like at the county fair where the guy with the hat puts the rabbit in it and the whole thing, right? So what is the point of the distraction? It probably has its own value. And secondly, what are the ways of getting to what's real? Because I think in order to do that, if you know something's a distraction, then you have to employ some sort of strategy to uncover what really is to be seen. And maybe the purpose is to inspire us to gather those tools at this point. You know, I mean, it's one thing to get your head out of the sand, but it's another thing to really see clearly. And I think that is the challenge in today's time. Like, and maybe that's what the distraction is for, is to help people go back to the drawing board and reorganize like where we think reality really is. Like, it was so interesting, just as an aside, in international trade law, we would represent these large American steel companies and Nucor and US Steel and et cetera. And they would be asking us to urge the government to enact these tariffs and countervailing duties on importers of steel products, you know, to the United States, rebar, blah, blah, blah. Turkey, Vietnam, China, of course, is the biggest one, Brazil, whatever. And it got to a point where we were involved in very complex litigation, and the clients would come to us and say, okay, can you slow down on this, because we actually own the subsidiary in Turkey that's like doing this. And so it kind of got to become a really kind of stupid game, right? Because these companies were so globally integrated that having sort of country-based tariffs didn't make any type of sense. It didn't end up hiring any more Americans. You didn't get anything cheaper or more expensive. You know, it was really kind of almost impossible to use this metaphor of trade, of what we traditionally thought of as international trade, to mediate these corporate disputes, essentially.
For sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I again and again, because I had no idea what it was like to interact with the U.S. government, and until not that recently, until quite a few years ago. And what I discovered is that if you operate along just normal ethical seeming procedures that you're offered within the context of how you interact, you know, when you're actually holding the truth, of course, you know, this is one of the most disillusioning things that could have happened, is you discover, oh, that doesn't work. It doesn't work. And then something, either you, you know, merrily make your way into
slaughter
into your conviction, or you start playing a different game. You start playing Jenga, and you start here's what you really discover. You discover that people, we'll say people, they do not necessarily respond to the facts. They respond to the level of conviction that you operate in, and how far into their circle of fear you're willing to step, because you are so clear that you are right. Only a person who is absolutely 100% living in their righteousness could do this. And so as you move, that becomes the message, and whatever means you use to make that message are secondary. Those are the actions I think we're making. And so I think that and I love what you said about the distraction. That was so good. And two levels. One is, I think it's, you know, a shell game in a lot of ways. Any word could be used, any means could be used, but there is something that we're doing.
Okay.
And well, I think we are. I think of it like how you train a dog. This is kind of what where you know, a dog will try to be the master unless you agree that you're the master, right? And there's a certain assertion of dominance that you have in order, because a system works better when the person is the master than the dog. The dog gets fed, for example, and the person doesn't get bitten, and a series of things happen. So I think there are, this is going to be, I don't know, I don't think I could get more political than I get, but I think there is an order of things in terms of the United States standing in its right position and standing in what's called Vajra pride, in the pride of being an American, and that this is healthy for everyone on the planet if we come from pride rather than self-loathing and hatred, which is what we devolved into. The statements that we're making about boundaries are the exact same statements that somebody who has been overrun by codependence makes when they're in recovery. It is a recovery of national self-esteem that begins to delineate who we are, who we aren't, what we'll interact with, what's okay, what's not okay. I also genuinely believe, no matter if you, most people, I don't know, whatever. I believe that Trump is vehemently opposed to kinetic war. And so I think that a lot of the actions that are being taken are preventative, and they're preventative, and you take a dominant stance, and then you can begin to control the war narrative in that way. Then, so what tariffs and are doing in the borders of Canada and Mexico, they don't have to do with they don't have to do with,
they're so out of left field that it has to do with something else. Like
right.
there is, I mean, even Trump has said, oh wow, this is a false border.
That's
He's
right.
like, okay.
That's it.
So I'm like, all right, well, do tell. Are any borders real?
They don't have to do with fentanyl.
None of
these
none
things.
of the pretexts. Yeah.
They have to do with an
Stance.
assertion. Yeah, exactly. And so I think what we're doing is we're reclaiming our stance. And then the question, and this is one of the reasons why I say this is how I feel about it today, is the question is, how are we going to use that stance? And my deepest prayer is that we are going to use it for, getting out of suffering causes suffering, helping others get out of suffering, that we will have the level of dominance and we will have the tools to do that. And then the question is, will we? And so I think what's part of the issue is that people are judging before we actually get our stance in place.
Oh, I see. Interesting. I mean, I can see that. That's not so far afield from, what could be reality.
You need to know, Omari saying that to me is a big win.
I want us to, continue to,
I'm in the could be reality range.
Well, also because, we've been there before. I mean, I think the reason why America became prominent in the world was because it had a somewhat isolationist stance. One, by definition of its geography vis-a-vis Europe and other places. It was far away. There was even the American foreign policy in the late 19th century, early 20th century was called splendid isolation. And so the deal was, okay, America is not going to get involved in Europe's old wars. It's not going to get involved in colonialism. It's not going to be, involved in all this stuff. And we're just going to sort of like live here and like be an example to the world. And we'll have trade relationships where we're not going to really be aligned. We're not going to have any alliances of that sort. And that lasted, I guess, up until, I would say World War II was when that stance by America changed. And so now we're at the end of that post-World War II order at this point. I see, especially with the fall of NATO and what that's going to mean going forward, immigration, all these things suggest a sort of like, you say a changing of stance, but like really it's a shrinking of American position. So we're taking more in.
That's right.
And by shrinking, I'm not saying that America is becoming smaller or less important or anything. It's just sort of like concentrating. More on itself. And so what are some of the things likely to be consequences of that? One, I definitely think this is going to force Europe to get its act in order. I mean, I was looking at
I
I was
agree.
looking at like the GDP of Europe is like something like 12 times the GDP of Russia or 20 times the GDP of Russia. So there's no way they should not be able to afford to, defend themselves militarily, even
Right.
assuming Russia wanted to have some kind of expansionary, now Russia though is expanding because I feel like they felt like they shrunk too much. And so they want all their old territories
That's
back
it.
and
That's it.
that type of
They
thing.
got too rigid. I mean,
Right.
that's usually what
Hmm.
you that this is the correction that I
Hmm.
fear, that we
Hmm.
go into overcorrection. Right now, I
Oh, I
think we're
see.
just in correction.
I see.
But
Hmm.
and I really do see the whole thing in terms of
Hmm.
like codependence. We went into a
Hmm.
codependent flare,
Hmm.
and that's where you lose sight of keeping
Hmm.
tending to home.
Hmm.
And then you are so strewn out here, and your monies
Hmm.
are being spent out here, and
Hmm.
your do-gooder things are being for
Hmm.
that identity. But you've run yourself into the ground,
Hmm.
and then it's time to pull it back, focus on your boundaries, focus
Hmm.
on what's important here, not focus on a personal level. It would be not focusing on people outside of yourself.
Hmm.
That's what I see us doing, recollecting ourselves in
Hmm.
that way in order to regenerate, get sane again. And then the
Hmm.
question is, where do we go from there, and how do we get there? All while in the midst of the biggest phase transition with AI. You have to add
Hmm.
that in,
Hmm. Hmm.
which profoundly shifts everything in the equation in terms of what will happen.
Yeah. I agree in the sense that like if AI enables us to one propagate ideas in ways that are still disembodied but more robustly transmitted, to improve efficiencies and everything to the point where we're not necessarily as interdependent on the sort of like mechanisms of global trade that we're involved in now, which reduce our need for, soul crushing and wealth stealing militarism,
Right.
then I'm all for that, right?
Right.
Because, those are not things that I thought we were headed to a path of destruction. There's no way we should have $1 trillion military budget for what.
Couldn't agree more.
So to the extent that we can, that AI helps us to one, build a more robust individual consciousness, and then ultimately human consciousness, to the extent that it makes us maybe transhuman in ways that obviate the need for borders, for defense secretaries, for these type of things, then possibly. And I think I would at least hope that some of those tools are being used in that way, or can be used in that way.
Well, that's fundamentally really why I think Elon's here.
Oh.
I think he's here. I mean, I think he's here to usher in that threat, first to destroy everything that needs to be that will become obsolete, and then to usher in the integration of AI into the system. I mean, that's my guess. And that, I don't know. I think, but I think we have a slight difference in how we view things, in that sometimes I feel like what I hear you saying is, I'll agree with AI if.
Yeah, I'm still skeptical. Yeah, I am definitely skeptical. Yeah.
And how I feel is,
Hmm.
that's like saying, I'll agree with gravity if.
Hmm.
And it's sort of like, okay, well, it doesn't matter if you agree with it, it's here. And so then how do we work with it? But it's just a.
No, I do agree. I've definitely taken a skeptical stance towards, what I think is a lot of investment of energy, of money. I mean, AI is basically transforming how we use our entire power grid.
Everything.
The
Everything.
massive amounts of investment. It's helping to realign. I mean, the US is seriously considering taking over, Singapore and Taiwan, which, would lead to a hot war pretty quickly if they,
Yeah.
if that happens. I don't think it's going to happen. But
although I think it is flaring.
Yeah.
It's showing up. Yeah.
So those are just the fact that that's on people's minds. Like I've, friends of mine who work in Silicon Valley, or engineers. I was talking to some this weekend, and they were seriously talking about like, how can we take over Taiwan and like Like, oh God.
But so then,
Like,
but
yeah.
so then you think about like the economy. This just made me think of, how Canada said if you put tariffs, if you have tariffs with us, then we'll shut down Pornhub. Right? I don't know if you heard this. This was their big
I had
threat.
no
We'll shut
idea.
down Pornhub.
Really? Oh
And
God.
then, but then, I saw one of these reels, and they now have AI porn,
Is it good?
which it's creative. I mean, they have some of the biggest tits and asses because like my tits hit the wall over there and my ass hits, and then there's just this little tiny waist, so it's so interesting. I went through one of the sites just to see the various things that they had where they like, I discovered that the people who make porn really love very young women and very old men, but they included the old men in the AIs. They love really disproportionate body sizes, and then they love just adding a dick on these women. So
wow.
you're like, oh, that's
wow.
interesting. But so it'll forever. So probably within 2 years, it'll take over OnlyFans, everything that we know, all of porn.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I was kind of half listening to the guy, the CEO of Anthropic, giving his speech somewhere this weekend, and he basically said, okay, AGI we'll have AGI by 2027. I felt like it was a pretty confident, bold prediction.
I think so too.
Okay, so you agree with him?
Oh yeah.
And I'm looking at like what I think are like people say are deep fakes, and even in my own work and writing and things like that, and it's a lot of fun playing with it, but I'm wondering like so at that point AI will start to generate its own images, it will start to generate its own media, it can create its own problems to solve and that type of thing. If that is the case, how do we adapt to that now? So there's one approach, which is to run for the hills and like build a log cabin somewhere, right? And then
I don't even think that'll work.
That'll work. Trust me, it'll work.
Okay.
Like we'll get to the monk's cave, the guy who disembodied himself, and like we'll just hang out in his cave, right?
Okay, I'm super down with that. But he's already having the AI experience.
Of course. So then that's the other approach. So I think you did hint at that, at your approach, the Buddha's approach, like the fact that AI has compounded all of the writings and can process them in a way that can lead to, or at least make it enlightened, I guess. But I don't know any of the precepts. So I'm interested to see how the AI became enlightened just by having the words of Buddha available to it. I mean, did it think it through?
And we'll make sure that you get that article, because I mean I think that's fascinating. But I think, see, here's a question, and that is it all already happening? And we are just getting the technology to introduce us into it. Because that's, really everything that I hear about AI is very similar to what the writings in Buddhism.
Oh, wow. Okay.
About the experiences, what's possible. You go to the Akashic records, you have all information available at your fingertips. You can go to these lectures actually with the Buddha, in dream time. All of these things are available, in that particular set of beliefs. So I think, and I just think AI is a more, I think I think it's probably the same thing. I think you're plugging into the same thing. Or
it'd be interesting to ask the AI to like write a new book of the Bible, or write a new book of scripture. Right? I'm sure it could come up with something. Would it be any less revelatory?
It would be the sutras.
Right.
So, so next week, what we're going to do is we will read the second half of this, and then we were going to open and have AI here, and you were going to.
We'll come up with whatever the experiment. This will be a collaborative group project, so I'll be reaching out to everyone.
Good.
To see how we could do a demonstration that makes some kind of.
We did one. It'll
Oh,
be very
you've already
easy.
done them. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
we did
okay.
it. We did a different one, but we'll do this
Okay.
and just say, we'll ask it how to best collaborate with it, and what it can show us and how it can get us there. What do you think? And we'll keep going deeper. We'll keep asking the deeper questions. And maybe what we can do is Maya is, she's sort of the inquiry master around here. We have a few. Maya is the head master. I like that one. And so what we can do is have her available to help us refine the questions. Because this is what will be, I think, the difference between those people who heaven and hell, those people who love AI and those people who feel a little uncomfortable with it, will be how well you can ask the questions that you want to ask, how you can keep going deeper with it. So we'll have some of that. We'll have you demonstrating with Maya and the questions, and then we'll read the rest of this. How's that?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nicole
and
Omari.
So fun, Omari.
Thank you. Very
so wonderful.
We will go ahead and take a few reflections. You can go ahead and raise your virtual hand on the Zoom or send in something on the chat, and we will start with Mauricio.
Hey guys, I love the conversation, especially the political angle. It's some stuff I've been thinking about lately. I love Omari's points and Nick's yours too. But I think Trump's president because he's supposed to be president, because the universe has chosen him to be president. He's like the great disruptor that no liberal could have had in office or have presented. And to preface this, I'm extremely liberal and extremely.
Yeah. No, we all have to do that. Isn't that funny? We all have to say, no, I'm a liberal. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I'm extremely liberal, but I think people don't always realize, because I can give credit where credit is due with the conservative Republican side when they're right. But Trump is serving the liberal agenda more than people realize. Without even meaning to. I'm not even a Trump supporter, but I think he's like a vessel being used by the universe. Like Omari mentioned, him questioning the border between Canada and America and calling it an imaginary line. That's beautiful. Even wanting to build a wall between Mexico and America is one thing, but then, he's calling it even the integrity of borders. Like, why should we even have borders? So definitely, that point is very important to me. So I think he's serving all sides. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, he does say, why should we have borders? Because we should own everything.
Right.
No, I think that's good. And Mo, I have this idea. I would love for you, if you want, at any point, to write out the ways that you think he's helping the liberal agenda, what you see.
That would be great. I would love to see that.
Yeah, I have more points. I just didn't want to go longer, but yeah, thank you.
Okay, great.
We'll go to Sarah next.
Hi. So there's a lot of things I'm really open-minded and easygoing, but when it comes to any serious talk about going to Mars, I see red. My heart's still.
Well, you do. Mars is red. Maybe that's what it is.
I mean, I have anger. Okay, there's Mars right there too, but it feels to me like the ultimate stomping of the feminine screaming. We have Earth. Just take 1/10 of that budget and clean the water, heal the soil. Do you know what I mean? We have Earth. Why would anyone seriously consider going to a parking garage in the sky and try to start over from scratch? So it just makes me literally so angry. I want to murder.
What about this, Sarah?
I can't even.
Because there are people who say, we have, in fact, friends of mine have said, I don't do psychedelics because I don't want to harm my own mind, whatever. We have all of this here. This is precious. Why would you need to do drugs when you can appreciate, and why do you need to go out there? Well, I think it's human nature to want to, to want to test the outer bounds of any location. I don't think that those two things, loving Earth have to be in opposition to, this has been one of the difficulties of this time, to exploration outside. In fact, I think those two things have to travel together. Recognizing and appreciating what we have here, along with the drive, it's freedom from and freedom to, along with the drive to explore outside. They actually, if they're not polarized, one makes the other healthier.
Agreed. And I would just say that if someone could post the Star Trek creed to the chat, I think that's a pretty good reason if you read it.
That's great.
I mean, I live by that creed.
Right?
Seriously. I mean, the minute I saw it, I was like, oh, I'm down with that. You know, to explore new lands, find new people, get new ideas. And I think the whole point was that you know who you are better by encountering things out there. So I'm not as interested in like the rocks on Mars as I am in the other potential life forms and things that are bound to exist.
Oh, that's interesting.
Let's get Earth handled. Let's get Earth handled first and then go explore.
What if we need this perspective to be able to handle Earth? I think you always talk about not being able to solve a problem from the perspective with which it was created. So what if we were outside of the Earth paradigm? It could, because I don't know if we'll solve Earth's problems from within this paradigm.
And I think there's one other element, and that's that different people are here to do different things. And I think exploring the frontiers, some people are called to do that, and then some of us are called, to heal the mycelium network.
Right.
And that if them doing that, let me see. They would not be doing this if they weren't doing that. That's just not their thing.
Right. So infinite within, infinite without.
Does that make sense? Each of us has a unique calling, and because somebody answers their calling that's different from mine, doesn't take away from my calling. I just worry about my own lane, and then they can worry about their lane, doing the best that they can at the frontier work, and I'm going to do the best that I can at the mycelium work.
It's not
I can keep going, but okay.
But next week, because I do want to talk about, because this is one of the things that I see. I also see it when people talk about billionaires, like the idea that billionaires having money means that other people don't have money. That it doesn't work that way. Just this group has this group doesn't have this. But if this group didn't have this, it wouldn't mean that this group had this. And so
if they can go to Mars without taking away from what needs to happen here, what needs to happen here first?
I think if
all that funding is going there to some like big fantastical dream when we have the body of the Earth right here. It just doesn't make any sense to me. That's all.
See, the way I kind of see it is that Elon created a whole new industry that has revolutionized not just cars, but mostly energy, because he was looking for a dense enough energy source to fuel interstellar exploration. And so like all Tesla is an experiment in how do we put enough energy into a battery to get all the way to Mars. And that has been net additive. If you look at sort of like, the products that he's created, the gas that it's saved, that type of thing. So you could say that him trying to solve that problem has created net value already.
As a byproduct.
Right, as a byproduct, as a side effect. I mean, that's just one way of looking at it. I'm not saying that is the truth.
I don't know, go down to the garden land and look, tell me if you'd want to go to Mars.
And I'm a liberal too, by the way.
Right. We'll go to Lisa.
Hi guys. Nicole, I loved when you had said like, I usher in and when you was like, the water's just fine over here in the AI world, right? And I noticed why I love this work so much is that if I spend too much time in a TikTok reel about different things like the orbs and the planes and tariffs and war and all these things, it's, really is about our perspective and our perception of things. And why I love coming to these rooms is that I feel like everything's very clear. Everything makes sense. And I get to remember that life really is a game. And it's easy to remember when things are like pretty and there's rainbows and butterflies. And it's not so easy to remember when the world looks quote unquote scary and dangerous and something's happening to us. But on this call, I felt inside of me a new level of play with what's happening in the world. And I was able to see different faces and possibility within our political climate that I didn't have before.
That's brilliant. That's great. That's my deepest prayer. That was when we would start to talk about politics, is that everybody could begin to see it as play rather than problem solving, because you can't solve the problem until you see it as play. It's great. Thank you.
Wendy?
Wendy.
Hi, both of you. I don't know where to begin. First of all, deepest gratitude for having these conversations, because the conversations for me are definitely heart, soul, and mind expanding. Unlike the lovely woman who just spoke, I'm left in a complete fog on a darkness cloud, understanding nothing, very little. I understand a lot, but I understand also I'm trying to make my way through what I perceive as an incredibly enlightening conversation that the two of you are having, and then my despair over very down to earth, down to earth, not multidimensional consciousness, which I also understand and just did a film on art and science and nature that went into the realm of quantum computers and what all that is going to mean in both the Buddhist and physics idea of multidimensionality. And then I read headlines of, by the way, I'm a progressive liberal, I'll just say, but
We knew.
just saying.
Clean it up with the word despair.
Yeah. But I also, there's a couple of things I really do want to offer some feedback, which I think the two of you have just brilliantly stated, that, you know, Trump is neither Republican or Democrat. That is so clear to me. He is, I'm going to say monster, but that's just my perspective today.
Maybe he's like a Lady Gaga type monster. You know, she calls
Maybe,
people
maybe.
little monsters.
History will tell. But when I read with great fear, you know, that he's cutting down trees. This is our mycelium network, you know, with due respect. 3 times the state of California. This is the lungs of the earth. This is not politics. It's not economics. It's not contrivance. It's not any game. This is the trees of nature. I gag. I start not being able to breathe, you know, like it's just when I read, he's cutting out all the systems we have of tracking climate, systems of understanding disease control, you know, CDC things when I'm reading or hear, I don't even know, sometimes is this accurate, but oceanic, you know, chemistry labs, you know, just the whole system. It's not just the political system, it's everything we use to perhaps know where we stand in relationship to the larger family of the whole world. I don't believe it's an imaginary border. I think Canada is sovereign unto itself, US is sovereign, you know, but whatever, borders, I'm less concerned about politics as we've known it as I am the very physical destruction that took millennia to build, like the trees, like the mycelium network, like the love we have for one another and not the cruelty that is showing up for one another. So all this is to say, one thing you've taught me, Nicole, sorry, this is meant to be a reflection, not my point of view. I'm just so emotional, and I love that your conversations open me up. But this idea of we live on a dualistic planet, and maybe the point of this dualism, the light and the darkness, is in fact to expand our consciousness to include the whole. This is what I learned a lot in our embracing the what we might call the darker sides of humanity. It's one of the biggest lessons I've ever learned from anyone, and from you in particular, and riding that wave of all the discomfort. So I sit in that. I'm willing to take what you said today and ride the wave, play, but also do strongly believe if we are a planet of dualism, I do believe we have some free will. We might be being pulled by a consciousness, but there's also got to be some free will to act. And I don't act in agreement with all the destruction that's going on, but do hear the response you suggested of becoming more creative, because it is happening. And that all leads me, sorry I'm babbling, I'm just so emotional about it, but I wonder if there's a dualism going on between AI and this humanism, that, profound humanism. And the reason that occurred to me today is I just saw, okay, a progressive liberal, but I listened to a YouTube video that David Brooks, a conservative,
Wow.
I'm way outside the bounds. I'm listening to David Brooks. No, just kidding. No, a beautiful thing. He was on YouTube and he gave a speech about really what's happening. And he too embracing this fierce humanism that needs to be called forth, now from all of us. Anyway, that's my reflection, a bunch of fog, but thank you.
No fog whatsoever, actually. And here's my thought in terms of what you said, is that what I see with my progressive liberal friends, who make up the greater portion of my friends, is the great disabling, and a group of people who are so disabled by their emotions, and that both they're blinded to a bigger picture, and they're fundamentally paralyzed in terms of how they interact with what could and should be brought forth. In fact, it's devastating to me to watch people so enfeebled by despair and anger, that the people with the deepest and most profound hearts, and I consider yours one of those hearts, first of all, are so susceptible to a progressively disabling narrative, and whose heart isn't out there in the world making weaving itself into the conversation, because it has bought the lie that there's any kind of opposition to anything, and that they're doing something, and that they're doing something has it be that your voice isn't included in the thread of karma. And I would much prefer to have your voice included. I mean, I had this thought when you were talking, I would love for you to make a movie called No Need to Despair. And to go through and have the movie prove that in these times, sort of how Van Jones in the first Trump administration went through and talked to people who had voted for Trump, and he had just thought they were just dumb hillbillies, was kind of the idea about, and he discovered that they were beautiful human beings, and something profound, he said, shifted in him from crossing over that line. And there's this imaginary line, and the imaginary line is having the people with deep, profound hearts, who are the mycelium people, not actually doing what it takes to bridge the difference, so that that's woven into the system. I put this in my thread again and again. We profoundly discount the amount of power that we have, and so then from a very powerless place we fight in our heads and get angry and upset, when all we have to do is figure out how to come in and bridge and bring our part. And that's, I know people say, oh, RFK is a nut, whatever, but he had something he wanted brought in, and he figured out how to align with what is in order to bring that into the world. And I would love to have your voice be one of those voices that figures out how to bring what I hear is the humanity and heart into the holistic vision, get that woven in. And that's how you change people. I'm just going to say this one last thing. And that is, I heard this about Trump, that he donated a very large sum of money to a dog shelter. And somebody said, oh, do you like dogs? And he said, no, but my daughter-in-law does. And she came and told me what happened to these dogs. So I had to donate. That's how it works. It works from the heart, communicating to the heart. And that's how, I mean, I've seen, he does that he's done that with several rappers, getting rappers out of prison. He did that. He has made more prison reform benefit than any president in the history of time. But that's because a human being with a heart went in and said, this is what matters. Like if you said that to him, not from the place of despair, but from your Vajra pride, from the rightness of what you know in your heart, you'd change lives. And that's the piece that I'm begging progressive liberals to drop. Drop the anger, it's disabling, and drop the despair, it's disabling. The message itself is important and true. What you see, trees are important and true. What you're saying is important, true. Just drop the rest of it and then say it from there, and we'll all follow.
Agreed.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate it. And it's possible, I think I just was a little shy. I'm so impassioned right now, given the conversation that was having, but I absolutely do agree with that. And I'm glad you brought it to the forefront again. And I'm not so sure his prison reform wasn't because he's facing prison, but that's beside the point.
He wasn't at the time.
He wasn't at the time.
He did it
Okay.
It was
a
his
cynical, it was a
administration.
snarky remark on my part.
Yeah, no, it was in his first administration, and one of my best friends was one of the people who was pardoned, Topeka Sams, and just the work he has done is, if you research it, see, this is one of the ways that we begin to, this is how he knows the story because he's working on this book. I'll just say this really quickly, but I have an erotic practice, and I noticed I would go through airports or whatever, and whenever I would hear him talking, I would freak out so much I'd have to go somewhere else. Or when anybody had something positive about him, I would freak out. I actually thought about moving to Mexico. I was so reactive and so panicked. I realized, wait a minute, I am in every other arena. I know better than to react fearfully. I know that, but I don't know that with this man. And in Buddhist practice and rhetorical practice, what you do is you try to make the person's argument better than they could make it themselves. That's how you go into it. And so I just started reading all of these conservative, Jonathan Turley, I still love. And some of them were, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe you believe that. And some of them were like, oh, actually, that's a nutrient that we do need. I came across Jonathan Rauch, some really, great thinkers. And so then all of a sudden I became more balanced, and then I became a unique voice unto myself. That's what I wish is those places if you feel panicked, do some research or try to make the argument for why they're doing it better than they could make it, and see if your mind changes or shifts or grows or sees something. It may not, there were times mine didn't, but there were often times, here's the biggest thing I'm going to say. I think most Americans are so arrogant that we are bleeding heart people, that more than we are willing to be the adults who understand fiscal responsibility. And that I ran a business, so I know that place where you don't want to be the one who says, no, we have to cut here, no, we have to do this, no, we have to do that. And the people who show up to do that part are not the people like you with heart. And you're the people who need to be in those conversations. But those people are so reactive that they're out of they've taken their toys and run. They've gone to blue sky. They aren't actually in the conversations, and that's who we need in the conversations.
Thank you. I will just reflect back, which maybe is the simplest thing. If there are two people who are going to take me through this portal, I'm very glad it's the two of you.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Yes.
He is just brimming with confidence.
No,
Because I love how you were like,
doesn't look like we have a choice, actually.
Yeah,
So.
we're going. I think there's one last
Matthias.
one.
Greetings, Omari and Nicole. It's a pleasure to be here, and I have a lot of thoughts. Could speak about how LLMs are both fancy auto correct, and also that they could be a harboring of consciousness. What arises as two takeaway points is the requirement for having an unerring commitment to discovering truth, whatever it is.
That's
and
right.
then also simultaneously an attunement to relationship and deep relationship for both yourself, the other, and also these kind of distributed systems, whether it's a mycelial web, whether it is emergent properties in an AI or anything larger. If we can do those two things, I think that could definitely help us navigate. So thank you.
Really, again, you're just our soundbite man. You pull it all together in such a succinct and elegant way.
Right.
Thank you.
And what the process you described sounds remarkably like wisdom.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, that's a Monday.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll see you again. I think we'll see you next week. If I'm in California, then we'll see you the following week. But we'll for sure see you next week or the following week. So thank you so much.